And happy late Tuesday evening to you out there, ladies and gentlemen. Doesn't matter the time, but we're coming to you live. It is another episode of Woo Fantasy right here. Brought to you as always by Rotoballer.com. That is right, Rotoballer.com, your one-stop shop for all things fantasy. Go to Rotoballer.com, sign up for this year's premium package. Includes articles, rankings, everything, you name it, we've got it at rotoballer.com. Promo code WOO at checkout for a special discount. We are here after a one week hiatus away. Co-host Nick Hefley back on the program to talk a little bit of fantasy football. Nick, how are we doing this evening, sir?
I don't know, man. How long are you going to keep that belt on your shoulder there? Jeez.
Well, that's what I was
doing. On the entire show here? You trying to do you flexing there with the flex?
It's flex draft week for me, heading up to New York City here in a couple of days to defend this nice puppy we got in just the other day, defending champion, heading up to New York City. This is the belt.
Give a little flex there. Okay.
Get a little show it off a little bit. Of course, I showed it off on Twitter the other day too.
Ooh, it's hurt my eyes, dude.
Yeah, the reflection. I mean, this is nice.
Let's see. All right, let's see. 10:02. Let's see how long you can keep it on there.
Oh, well, I can keep this thing slung on my shoulder all night long. But anyways, we're here. It's draft month.
Let's go.
How are we feeling?
Day one. Man, I'm ready to go. We're smack dab right in the middle of Raz Bowl, the league you and I have done for a couple years here now. Finished up Scott Fish Bowl a couple of weeks ago, so it's prime draft prep season for you and I know, and everybody else out there as well. So I'm excited.
Right. I mean, it's obviously training camps are kind of underway now. You know, basically a week into training camp for all teams across the board, and as is the case every single summer, and what we're seeing over the course of the last few days is everyone looks great. Hype videos left and right, everyone. No matter where you look on Twitter. So as things currently stand right now,
there we go.
Yeah, So, but as things are currently constituted, what's your takeaways from early indications, some of the camp buzz from around the NFL? I know, like here in a couple minutes, we're going to get into the biggest news, obviously, that's dropped down the channel over the last few days, and that's the Jonathan Taylor stuff. But outside of the Jonathan Taylor and Indy Colts situation, what's something that's kind of caught your eye early on in camp?
I think some of it too is the lack of, at least for me anyway, big time injuries. Joe Burrow, I think everybody had their collective breaths held. For his situation, seems like he's going to be coming out of that unscathed. But I mean, that has fantasy ramifications everywhere. If for whatever reason, like that coaching staff has done in the past, kind of downplay injury situations like they did with Joe Mixon in the past. So you hope that's not the case, but to me, that is probably, for me anyway, is probably the biggest bit of news. Knock on wood, no big injury so far. Tim Patrick, hey, sorry. I know we got a couple situations out there that, it bears some looking into, but by and large, nobody that's going to affect your fantasy teams if you already started drafting or done some underdog drafts.
Well, I mean, to a degree, I mean, I know it's still early and we don't really have any a timetable set per se, but the Kenneth Walker situation, the Zach Charbonnet situation in Seattle. Both of those guys are hurt right now. You don't really have a set timeline as to that situation. So how are you viewing that, the way that's currently constituted with both of them? Charbonnet's got the shoulder. Kenneth Walker's got the groin. Last year he had some issues with the soft tissue injuries later on in the year. So maybe that stems from that. But how are you viewing that backfield situation with both the 1 and the 2 down?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely affects Charbonnet more than it does Walker. I mean, Walker's had a year in the system now. Charbonnet's got to come in and prove himself, show that he's capable in the backfield, especially blocking. Pete Carroll's not going to put a guy out there that doesn't know how to block and doesn't know the schemes to get Geno Smith killed out there. For me, I'm not really. It's not really affecting my draft board. To me, everything that I've heard coming out of that camp is going to affect Charbonnet more and longer term than it will Walker. That's not to say, Walker's going to be healthy and out there playing, but it almost feels like one of those situations for me anyway, to where, Walker benefits just a little bit by this too. I think if Charbonnet had come out, set the world on fire, been running with the ones when Walker is out, that could have definitely affected draft boards quite a bit. But at this point, I don't really see and read much into it right now. Walker staying the same. Charbonnet is going down the board just a little bit for me, but that was going to be the case anyway, whether he was healthy or not.
Yeah, I mean, outside of that, I mean, you've got early on, like I said, it's a little bit too early to tell with a lot of the things that are kind of unfolding as, the early parts of the camp come on. I know just within the last hour or so, I know I saw a little bit of news come down out of Rams camp that Cooper Kupp walked off the field with a trainer earlier today. Yesterday, I think it was Calvin Ridley walked off the field with the trainer. Probably more precautionary more than anything at this stage of the game. You don't want to really overload the guys and put too much emphasis on the work early on in the camp. You want these guys to kind of pace themselves and be ready to go towards the end of camp. So that's obviously the situations there. But yeah, I mean, that's full-fledged camp news left and right everywhere you turn. Take all this information in with a grain of salt, because obviously everybody is pushing to the moon. These guys are looking great. They're fantastic. Everything
one-handed catches left and right. Everybody's making them.
Yeah,
I seen you something earlier. Dak Prescott's throwing picks where people are catching one-handed. Oh, but it's the never mind.
Yeah, and you've got the San Francisco 49er fans and Philadelphia Eagle fans that are in the Cowboys training camp Twitter account that going, oh, he's in mid-season form. Yeah, okay, great. Yeah. It's 2 days camp. Let's pump the brakes a little bit. Everything is
I mean this is definitely the time of year where it really depends on who you follow and the kind of news that you're getting. If you're just out there watching clips all day long, you're going to get a very different picture of what's going on. You're going to see the one highlight reel catch somebody makes, but the 3 or 4 drops that somebody didn't show out there as well. So it definitely pays to know who to follow this time of year and who really has that hype going on and who's just a little bit of a highlight monster.
Right, as is the case with one George Pickens. We saw another highlight reel catch with him earlier today. Possibly could have been a little bit of offensive pass interference. Depends on how you want to view that clip that's out there on Twitter right now. But outside of that, let's touch on it. Now, I just mentioned it a few minutes ago, the Jonathan Taylor situation with the Colts. Obviously, we all saw the tweet with Jim Irsay over the weekend that looked like he might have been doing a little bit of drinking and tweeting, or Xing, whatever you want to call it now, depending on how Elon Musk wants to change the situation on social media.
Apparently, if you post something and I try to share it, it's still called retweeting. So
we don't exactly know exactly what to call it. So the Jonathan Taylor Colts situation, they came out. There was a report that came out from a source that he had a back issue that he came into camp with, and team was thinking about putting him on the NFI, the non-football injury list. And if he doesn't show up to camp, doesn't play, then that contract for this year is pushed to next year, which then basically everything unfolds another year later. And Taylor was quick to respond to that and was like, I don't know what you're talking about with this injury. Get a better source. It's getting ugly in Indianapolis. What's your view on how things are going right now?
It doesn't sound like a great situation over there, but let's face it, we're not really – I don't really care about Jonathan Taylor's fantasy situation in Indianapolis. I just care about his fantasy situation for this season. So whether he stays there, he's going to run with a chip on his shoulder. If he gets traded, I mean, most situations in the league, unless he's got somebody there that he's going to be competing with, he's going to be going in a good spot. So for me, it doesn't really do anything for him. I don't see him sitting out. There is, in my mind, there is no way he is sitting out the year. And that's the only way for me he's going to affect his value. So for me, maybe it just affects the team that he plays for, but I don't think his position, if he goes to another team, it may even be a better situation than he's in right now with that, good Colts offensive line. But Let's say he gets traded to Buffalo, Miami. Heck, he could go to my Chicago Bears there. They got plenty of money all of a sudden here that they need to be spending. I mean, there's a lot of situations that he could go to out there. I really just don't see the Colts trading him.
No.
I see him coming back. He's got to earn a paycheck. There's no way he's not, especially with the running back position being so devalued. Again, just like we talked about Saquon Barkley the last time we talked about this, it was worrying owners. Was it worrying me? Not really. Is this worrying me? Not really.
Nah, I mean, I'm still kind of feeling strong when it comes to Taylor and the fact that he'll eventually show up. I know there was I can't remember the account on Twitter earlier, but there was a AFC scout, and they're not going to name the team or anything like that, that said, watch out for the Kansas City Chiefs as a potential swoop in and might make a trade offer to the Colts if that was really on the table. Which
Sure.
let me go ahead and point this out. That would just be a rebound for the Chiefs because that should have been the pick they made a few years ago in the first place, as opposed to Clyde Edwards-Helaire at the end of the first round.
100%.
So yeah, that might be a revisiting, past mistake in the NFL draft for them if that were to come down the pike. So not affecting your value on Taylor right now. I'm kind of in the same boat. Let it kind of play out over the next couple of weeks or so. Same thing with Josh Jacobs. I think I saw earlier today that the Raiders are now ready to re-engage in talks with Josh Jacobs to attempt to bring him into the fold and get him back with the team. I think they have a floor in which they can work a contract with him now with that Saquon Barkley deal. That's something that they can kind of use as a negotiating point. Here's where Barkley went. This is where we slot you in at. I think both sides are probably going to be able to talk now. So if you're drafting this weekend, possibly, or you're even doing underdog drafts currently, like I am as well, I think you're still taking these guys at kind of the same spot you would normally consider taking them until we learn more. I mean, you don't want to let another fantasy manager get these guys a round or two later, bolstering a roster, and then you're already behind the eight ball when it comes to going against these teams when the regular season actually starts. So that's something to keep in mind.
Oh, I mean, 100%. I mean, it's one of those situations too. I mean, let's say like, in Rasbowl, like I was looking at a little bit earlier, I guess this was yesterday, staring down Saquon Barkley or Jonathan Taylor. Maybe you go Saquon just for these guys are pretty even. Let's go with the correct value there. But, maybe they drop a spot or two, but they're not dropping around. If somebody's letting you drop these guys a full and complete round and something like this, you got to go hit that and hit it quick.
Oh, without a doubt. That's something too. Like you're seeing, gosh, I think in a couple of drafts that I saw, you're seeing Taylor even sneak into the third round. I think there was one of those fantasy pros versus Joes drafts. Either it was tonight or last night. If I'm not mistaken, someone started off CMC first round, Derrick Henry second round, third round, Jonathan Taylor. That was their start to their draft in that. And looking at the rest of their roster, I mean, that one's going to be a stout team to contend with. Just how they built it out and took advantage of a falling player. So, like we just mentioned, you don't want to really gift wrap players in a draft because you're feeling a little bit speculative. And I'll even throw myself under the bus on this. This is with 2 years ago, I think, in the flex draft. We had that situation with the Colts offensive lineman that was injured in training camp. And there was a lot of with Quentin Nelson. There was, a lot of speculation out there as to whether or not he was going to be playing in the regular season, how that was going to unfold, how that was going to affect Jonathan Taylor's draft stock when it comes to fantasy production. I mean, I kind of talked myself out of Jonathan Taylor that year. I passed him by, and if I'm not mistaken, I could have had him in the second round, passed him up for a player that really did not produce to the level that I needed him to, and it came back and bite me in the ass. I mean, so now we're back in the same boat, same player, different story. So, like we just mentioned, pump the brakes, let everything kind of come down, let a lot of the news surface. Don't overreact first weekend of training camp. That's always something you see a lot of people kind of trap themselves into that mindset early on in drafts, and they definitely cannot do that.
It's definitely one of the situations too. I mean, most people are not drafting this early. You're getting your boards together, but if you are drafting this early, I definitely don't think it's something that you need to pay too much credence to. You definitely need to, again, like you said, take all this with a grain of salt. We're not. The one situation that I think I'd be worried about out of any of these guys is Josh Jacobs. He has absolutely talked that language more than any of these other guys. That may be one guy that I would drop down. Again, a player or two, not around, but a couple players. But again, somebody to take advantage of when that value is right. But maybe he's gone from middle of the second round down to late second, early third at this point. Which is probably about right for him anyway. So
yeah, that's what I've definitely done that with my updates to the rankings at rotoballer.com. As I've Josh Jacobs is now kind of a fringe RB1 for me, with the situation being the way that it is, and he's kind of falling into that early third round area that I've got him in overall rankings as things kind of stand right now. So if he comes back into the fold, we know he's playing the full 17, or at least slated to play the full 17, then I'm probably sliding him back up into, that 7-8 range at the position, because let's be honest, he's the main focal point of that offense outside of Devontae Adams, of course. But we saw last year, even with Adams in tow, Josh Jacobs led the NFL in rushing. So that's really kind of the focus of the offensive attack, and that's what the team, I think, wants to do again in 2023, is lean on the run game and kind of slow down the pace of the game, kind of rely on the defense and try to play more close scoring ball games and try to stay in it that way. So maybe Josh Jacobs over the course of the next week or two, we get some more positive news there. So jumping into kind of the main thing we're going to talk about tonight is wide receiver draft plan. We want to kind of take you through how the ADP consensus is currently with fantasypros.com. Taking a look at the tiers of wide receivers. So wide receiver 1, 2, 3, etc. on down the board. We want to look and see how these guys are shaking out with rankings currently right now. I'll factor in some of my rankings with the players, of course, too, and point out values in each tier and guys that you probably might want to let slide to the next manager in your draft. So obviously at the top of the board, when you're getting into the wide receiver ones, I think, as we continue to talk and we say year after year with this podcast, is you're splitting hairs between Jefferson, Jamar Chase. I'll throw Cooper Kupp in there myself. And I don't know if you want to throw in Tyreek Hill into kind of like reaching for that upper echelon tier there, but those guys are not really the debate here when it comes to this wide receiver 1 tier. You know what you're getting with those players, but really what we want to debate in the wide receiver 1 tier is further down into the list. And you're talking guys that are on the back end of this ADP consensus currently right now. So you're looking at we'll go from 6 on down, because Stephon Diggs is currently 5. I'm okay with him being where he's at right now, although I don't have him ranked there. But 6 on down through 12, you got CeeDee Lamb, Devontae Adams, A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, and Devontae Smith rounds out your wide receiver 1 tier. Out of those guys that you see there, confidence level, who has your highest confidence level? Who has your lowest confidence level?
So in that group right there, I would definitely say, probably my highest confidence level of that group, I would say Amon-Ra St. Brown is definitely, trying to separate himself from the pack. He's got the amount of receptions there, at least the first 6 weeks. There's no Jameson Williams there. So I think he is primed to, continue to take that next step up the wide receiver board. For me, the one name that really sticks out as a very much of a 50-50 shot, and I get where the hype is coming from, I will not be taking the plunge, at least this early in drafts, is Garrett Wilson. To me, there's a lot of mouths to feed there with the Jets. Aaron Rodgers is getting a little bit older. Who did he have last year do much of anything? I mean, Christian Watson had some big catches, but that was more, the exception than the rule. So for me, Garrett Wilson is that guy for me that's in the top 12 right now that I just can't see myself taking that plunge on him.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you there. Going into Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think me and you are both on the same page. I've got him currently as my wide receiver 5, right behind Tyreek Hill. If you kind of go and look at deeper into the stats last year, ran 456 routes, as opposed to some of the other guys you see at the top of this list. He was second in targets per route run, 31.8%. which was only behind Tyreek Hill at 32.3%. So obviously a guy that's going to get a lot of looks in that offense. We know Jameson Williams out the first 6 weeks. What are they really going to get from that secondary wide receiver in that offense? I think everything's going to funnel through Amon-Ra St. Brown in that offense. And something that I mentioned to you, just yesterday, the wild stat where he was tackled at the 1 yard line 7 times in 2022. If he can convert half of those into touchdowns this year, he's easily, I think, inside the top 5. And that's why I've got him ranked there. So I agree with you there on confidence level out of that grouping with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Outside of that, and I wrote about it, if you kind of backlog into rotoballer.com, one of my earlier ADP duels, I did an ADP duel that involved A.J. Brown. Not as confident with A.J. Brown coming into 2023 as I was going into 2022. Numbers at the end of the year and in total, sure, they look great. A.J. Brown was a wide receiver 1 last year, provided you with great statistics if you look at it as a whole. But if you start breaking things down towards the end of the year, you really started to see a little bit more of a spread mentality between he and Devontae Smith. Devontae Smith actually out-targeted him down the stretch and was more focused. He was more of the focal point of that passing attack as far as the first read option in that passing attack down the stretch too. So that's something that gives me a little bit of a pause to see A.J. Brown go high in drafts. So it's going to be a situation where I think I'm probably not going to get a lot of A.J. Brown in some of my drafts this year, just because I'm not going to be ready to pull the trigger when he's going to come off the board, is how I'm looking at that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely one of those situations where, where A.J. Brown is going, I think I would rather have Devonta Smith. Just because I feel like I can get him a little bit later. I feel like the value is going to be at the end of the year fairly even amongst those two. So, that being said, I'm a little more comfortable taking the plunge on him.
And to that degree as well, too, I'm not ready to put Devontae Smith at as high as 12. That's still a little bit too rich for my blood. I've got Devontae Smith at wide receiver 16 right now, but that's because I do value some other players a little bit higher. And to the same degree, Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle was a very hot and cold player last year that we saw. Obviously, I just mentioned this, the targets per route run with Tyreek Hill. With Jalen Waddle, it was a little bit different of a story. He was all the way down at 22.8%. So there's a pretty good difference between those two as far as what their options are in that passing offense. I don't see Jalen Waddle as a guy that I'm ready to really hammer home as a wide receiver 1 in drafts this year. So I think that is a buyer beware situation as well. So getting into the wide receiver 2s out of this grouping here, as we're looking at the Fantasy Pros ADP consensus, this tier is going to be T. Higgins, Chris Olave, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, Amari Cooper, Keenan Allen, Calvin Ridley, Terry McLaurin, DeAndre Hopkins, everyone's love of the Tennessee Titans receivers, DJ Moore, Bears' #1 receiving option, Christian Watson, and to round out the top 20 for this group at wide receiver 2 at 24 is Jerry Jeudy. Same question here. Confidence level, who's catching your eye, and who are you letting slide by?
So for me in this group, confidence level, I'm probably hitting on 2 guys, probably DK Metcalf and Amari Cooper. I mean, DK, I think, has established himself in that offense as the go-to receiver. And same thing for Amari Cooper. I mean, you got Deshaun Watson, back with a full and complete offseason, getting ready to be under his belt. He is, again, the clear #1 receiving option in that offense, which it looks like they're going to be a little more pass happy this year. than they have been in recent years. So definitely like the value getting him all the way down at 17. He's been a fringe number one receiver in the very recent past here. So he's definitely somebody that down the low I would certainly love to see. Man, there's a couple of guys in this tier that I am not really feeling. Calvin Ridley, for me is going a little bit higher than I would want to see him go, and that I would be comfortable taking him. I mean, you're seeing Ridley go over guys like a Chris Godwin and Mike Williams, who I know is going to be there. I don't know what Calvin Ridley is going to bring, a couple of years out of the league here. DeAndre Hopkins is somebody I will not be touching at that ADP either. Again, you're in an offense that they're not going to be throwing the ball much there. I'm sure Hopkins is going to get his own and have some good games. I'd much rather have him in a best ball league versus, a week to week. And then probably the most glaring name that stands out to me is Christian Watson. You got an offense in Jordan Love. We have no idea what we're going to see from him. Clearly taking a step back from Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love. So Christian Watson is definitely somebody that at his current ADP, I will not be touching.
Yeah, that's the thing. Looking at this tier of wide receivers, this is a situation where you already have a lot of question marks with a lot of these players. One that I don't have too many questions with right now is Deebo Samuel. I think coming into this year, fully healthy, I think a more defined role in the offense. If you go look back at his numbers with Brock Purdy under center last year, he led the receiving options for the 49ers, I believe, at 25% target share with Purdy under center. So he's the number one option for Purdy there in an offense that we know can produce fantasy success for wide receivers. And that even goes for Brandon Ayuk too, that a lot of people are hyped on right now heading into the season too. So for this group, I'm looking, Deebo Samuel I like. Obviously, I'm a big fan of Chris Olave. I think there's going to be a nice step progression into year 2 for Chris Olave, now with a better quarterback with Derek Carr there in New Orleans this year. So I think that's going to bode well for him as well. And then also Keenan Allen. I think Keenan Allen, injuries aside, whatever, missing games, whatever you want to put out there, that offense, Kellen Moore, there's going to be a little bit more of a efficient passing game this year with that offense. And I think everything going through Keenan Allen's going to help his production as far as a week-to-week basis. He's going to be a guy that you can continue to count on. And when he was on the field last year, he was that same way. But, I mean, you nailed it with Christian Watson and DeAndre Hopkins. Both of those guys I've got outside the top 24 right now. I've got Watson at 27. I've got Hopkins at 28. I'm not feeling either one of those two guys. I'm not excited about it. And even with Calvin Ridley, you mentioned him as well. Got him on the ADP consensus at 19. I've got him at 22. Similar situation. Many mouths to feed in that offense right now, and you don't know exactly who's going to be the go-to on a week-to-week basis. 1 week Ridley might be the target earner of the week. The next week you might be Christian Kirk. The next week it might be Zay Jones. You don't know, and then Evan Ingram factoring in on that one as well.
You didn't mention your boy Evan Ingram there. Okay,
Evan Ingram as well. I mean,
okay, all right.
There's guys up and down that passing tree, that depth chart on as far as the wide receivers go there. That's going to really, it's going to be a headache for fantasy managers that are counting on Calvin Ridley as a wide receiver too, and they need that production on a week to week basis, and it just might not be there. That's something that's going to be tricky.
I mean, you mentioned it. I mean, all three of those guys, to me, if I can get as a wide receiver 3, I'm loving it. As a wide receiver 2, I am really questioning the makeup of my team, and you got to have a lot of things to go right for me for those 3 particular guys.
And that's the thing too. Like, I've noticed doing a lot of these underdog drafts throughout the offseason, and I mentioned it to you with all the ones that I've done, is that the amount of wide receivers that are going off the board early on, you're going to be in a position where, depending on how you want to build your roster, you're going to get guys like Christian Watson. You're going to get guys like a DeAndre Hopkins as your wide receiver 3, because you're going to start out wide receiver. And that's how your roster is going to start out. And that's what you're looking to do, especially in leagues. Let's go ahead and point that out. Leagues that start wide, 3 wide receiver, full point PPR. There's a little bit more of an emphasis to go ahead and get your wide receiver in these leagues. as opposed to like me doing the flex draft this weekend, which will be on Sirius XM. Listen in on Saturday morning, flex draft live from New York City. So
flexing for the flex draft.
I'm putting them up right now. We're going to defend this title, ladies and gentlemen. So that league in particular, yeah, it starts 3 wide receivers. You have 2 flex. It's a half-point PPR. So my mindset changes with this league as opposed to, we're doing the Raz Bowl right now. Full point PPR starts wide, 3 wide receivers. You want to be able to get a little bit of flexibility between the 2 different formats. That's a know your format discussion. We have it on this show every single year leading into drafts. You have to know your formats. So assuming full point PPR, start 3 wide receiver, looking at guys like that, Watson, Hopkins, those are guys that I would prefer to have as a 3rd wide receiver as opposed to a 2, which they're currently listed as an ADP consensus. So if you're grabbing them as a wide receiver 2, I think you're obviously you're more than likely already drafted other positions early on, and I think that's where that's going to have those guys landing in your wide receiver 2 spot. You would agree there?
Yeah, no, 100%. And one of the nicer things too that we're doing with Raz Bowl, it's best ball too. So even a full point PPR starting 3 receivers, my strategy changes with a best ball format as opposed to non-best ball. Like I took Derrick Henry in round 2, and we'll take that to the bank because he may not have as good a year as he had last year and in previous years when he's actually healthy. But in a best ball format, I get to throw away those bad weeks and get his 100-yard and 2 or 3 touchdown weeks and get to just have that in there. Dude, I'm taking him all day long over some of these other people in here. So definitely know your format. I think that's very important when taking accordance. You hear it all the time. Look, we don't have to tell you that. You should know your format. But really, I think one of the things that I know Brandon and I do, each of our leagues would come up with custom rankings for each of these leagues. Look, I've got a board right over here, draft kit. I have rankings. They tell me what the rank is. Guess what? I don't go by that. It's just a tool to be able to use. It's not a Bible. It's not the written rule. So when you're in there, do your own rankings. You'll be surprised at how much you feel like you succeed, even more so than just going simply off a sheet or a magazine. Don't do
that. Yeah, don't do that. But that's
not
important
1999
too.
Anymore.
Also another important thing, what we're going through and kind of giving you this wide receiver draft plan and going through the wide receiver tiers is because that's a big thing when you're sitting down at a draft, is knowing your tiers, knowing where the value depreciates and you need to move to a different position to build your roster. Navigating through the ebbs and flows of a draft is important, and that's how tier-based drafting is really kind of helpful, knowing where you need to kind of start focusing elsewhere or where you can kind of attack, because there's still value on a certain tier, but other people are kind of zigging and going another direction, and you can kind of really hone in on a certain area and help build the depth of your roster. So that's definitely something to do as well.
And something you and I do differ a little bit. There's a lot of shows out there that you can listen to that both hosts are going to agree with everything that Jesus says. And I'd say for the most part, Brandon and I are right there together, but Brandon's very tier based. I am, if I see a guy out there and I really want to go get him, I'm going to go get him. I don't care what tier he's in. I'm going to go out there and go grab him because that's my guy. To hell with everything else, to hell with what the draft board says. If that is my guy, I'm going to go out and go get him. So I'll rank somebody way higher. And guess what? If I'm wrong on the guy, I'm wrong. But if I'm right on the guy, I'm going to be really right. I'm going to be happy that I got that person. So again, you got to do enough drafts to be able to figure that out. You got to do enough mocks to be able to figure that out and what you're comfortable with and where you can take that chance and where you can't. A lot of it too comes down to draft position and where you're at. You may be at the beginning or end of a round and know, well, man, I really need a quarterback. If I wait till the next time around, probably not going to be able to get that guy. So I've just got to go ahead and take that. So you got a lot of things to consider. It's definitely not one of those things you can sit back and just, hands off, like, hey, I need to not pay attention and I'll just pick the next guy from my board. No, it's always important every single round to do your best.
Yeah, and that was something else that I was going to point out too. You nailed on as far as draft position, kind of knowing where you're at. Obviously the flex draft on Saturday this week. We already know our draft positions. I'm drafting from the 12 spot. So to Nick's point, as opposed to being tier based in my thinking, this is more of a, I got to go get my guys at the end of these rounds in the beginning and these wraps, is because there are players that I covet more than others. Am I going to get to the end of this round and see, all right, this is the next best available person on the list? No, I value this person a little bit better. He's one of the guys that I think is going to have a good year. I'm going to go ahead and get him. ADP be damned, where he's going in this draft be damned. I'm going to go get my guy. That's the situation that I'm going to be put into with the draft this weekend. I mean, I've already got the wheels have been spinning for days as far as what I want to do in this particular draft. And it's going to be flexible all the way up until the point until the moment I make my pick and see what's there at that point in time. So kind of like, Nick said there, and that's another point we preach with this podcast consistently every single year leading into drafts too, is flexibility, being able to sit there. Don't be hammered in on what your one plan is. I'm going to do this round, this the next round, this the next round. Things are going to hit you left and right, and you're not going to know exactly what you need to do. You're going to have to be able to change at the drop of a hat and get different guys at different levels. And that's the thing. Like, don't draft on tilt. And we always talk about that on this program. That's something to keep in mind when you're sitting there and you're coming up and your pick's coming up and you're like, oh man, these guys just got taken from me. 2 picks in front of me. Both the guys I wanted were just sniped. And now I don't know what to do. You should always have guys in your queue ready to go, or thoughts of multiple players ready to go. That's the thing. I mean, you have to be able to be flexible. Your best and most competitive fantasy managers that are out there are always thinking 2, 3, 4 steps ahead in a draft, not
2, 3, 4 rounds ahead in a draft too.
Exactly.
And I think one of the things too, like, you've got a mock draft, and you can't just mock draft on some of these simulators and because that doesn't simulate real life and what's going to actually happen in some of these drafts. I definitely agree with you. You got to be flexible, but I think you have to at least go in having a plan of like, hey, I want to go in and I want to at least try to get a one quarterback between, hey, I want to go get one of the early quarterbacks in round 3, or hey, I'm comfortable waiting until rounds 5, 6, and 7, or hey, I'm just going to punt the position. Whatever that build is that you want to build, I think you have to come in and have at least the outset of that plan available. Know when you're going to attack tight end. Am I going to take one running back early and go a little wide receiver heavy early, and pound the running backs in the middle rounds? You got to have that role, or what you feel comfortable as a build that's going to get you the most points.
Yeah, and I think that also speaks to the importance of a lot of these underdog drafts, is that, they're best ball mentality, and they, a lot of guys take a different approach when it comes to a best ball draft, but it's also giving you a good indication of where players are going to be going. Not exactly where they're going to go, but in the ballpark, in the neighborhood of where these guys are coming off the board.
Sure. But I think the more important thing there, because it is a best ball, it is a little bit different with that format, but the thing that I always pay attention to with those underdog drafts is not necessarily the round and where these guys are necessarily going. Hey, this guy went in round 5. I can expect to get him there too. Look at more the placement at the end of the draft of what their overall rank is. Well, heck, this guy was, running back 15. Well, why do I have him ranked at running back, 8? I don't know, but those are the kind of things I pay attention to a little bit more is where these guys are going, looking back at my rankings, seeing where I'm at. Am I going to get some value here for a position? Am I a little under? Am I a little over on my rankings? Not necessarily saying I'm going to adjust my rankings based on that, but just knowing where I may be able to get some value based on my own personal rankings going into that.
Yeah, that's true. You do have to kind of have all these things brought into the draft room and ready to go when you're kind of thinking about how you want to play your draft strategy, using a draft plan, that and this, that, and the other. Before I get out of this wide receiver 2 tier, I wanted to ask you real quick, thoughts as things stand currently, DJ Moore. Where are you at with DJ Moore?
I've done a lot of underdog drafts so far, and I seem to find myself with him more and more often.
I'll say this. Early on, so 2 months ago, I had a lot of Fields DJ Moore stacks. Over the course of the last 2 to 3 weeks, it's been harder to get. because they're rising
Sure.
in popularity.
Sure, yeah. It's one of those things, I like DJ Moore. DJ Moore has historically been, over the last couple of years, a on or about a number 2 receiver or better since he's been in the league. He's going to an offense, though, where the number 1 last year, my boy, Mr. Mooney, did not exactly have a great year last year. They weren't exactly throwing the ball a whole lot. Cole Kmet got a lot of that action over there. So I don't know exactly how many balls there are going to be to go around in Chicago. I feel like they're going to throw the ball a little bit more because their running game is not, to me, as good, at least coming in with David Montgomery now gone to Detroit. I'm cautiously optimistic. I will say, like I do in most years when I have a chance to draft a Chicago Bears wide receiver, the rule is usually you pass on the Chicago Bears wide receiver because it has been quite a while since we've had a really good receiver, going back to me anyway, to the Brandon Marshall days when we've had a good, solid guy that I would absolutely want and count on and control.
Muhsin Muhammad.
So, I used him on Immaculate Grid today as my Bears and Carolina Panthers. If I could do the move right now, I would do it. But but no, DJ Moore, again, I think he's one of those guys I'm cautiously optimistic on. If I had him as my 2 a little bit later, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but I would be way more comfortable with him as a number 3. Taking him, if I took some of those receivers early, getting DJ Moore as my 3 would be a little bit more comfortable for me, just the amount of balls that are being thrown around in that offense. So,
yeah, as we continue to talk about year after year, the Bears have still yet to have a 4,000-yard passer in that offense, dating back throughout the franchise's history. Will that be broken this year?
Unless they start combining rushing yards and receiving yards in that stat, absolutely not.
318 attempts for Justin Fields last year. Will he go over 400?
So he needs what? Let's see. He had 318, so he needs 80 more over about 20 games, so 4 more a game. Yeah, I think he goes over that.
So
not by much.
400 divided by the 17 games would be 23.5 pass attempts per game.
It's not a lot.
It's not a lot.
But for the Bears, that's a lot in comparison from last year.
It is.
But I think last year, I think they are going to throw the ball
per game.
I think they are going to throw the ball just a little bit more than what they did last year. I think they realized that is not a sustained success. They were in a lot of games, though. They may have had the number 1 pick. They were in a lot of games, especially in the first half, running the ball like that. They got away from that. They had some turnovers that got them away. I'm not saying they're going to win the division by any stretch of the imagination, but they're not as bad of a team as what they played last year.
Right. So I say all of that to say this. Justin Fields, if we get him over 400 pass attempts this year, I've got DJ Moore currently ranked at wide receiver 20 in my rankings on Rotoballer.
Okay.
If we get Justin Fields at 400 or above, can DJ Moore get in the top 15 at wide receiver this year?
I think he has a chance to.
There we go. I'll take that.
I think he has a chance to. Yes.
Because I think that connection is going to be one that's going to be, especially early on in the year, is going to be one to watch. Is how that connection starts to begin the year. The off-season training really helped between those two. Is that connection going to be there? I think if they click early on and Fields, let's say, stays healthy, because obviously he's going to run the ball a lot.
Sure.
I think that could lead into DJ Moore being a guy that's going to have a positive return on investment. I use that term. That's a term that I mentioned that on last week's podcast with Josh Larkey too. Is that's kind of a term that a lot of fantasy managers like to reiterate is return on investment, is positive ROI. Or negative ROI. Yeah. So it just depends on where you're drafting them and where they finish. If you're getting a lot of guys on your roster that are giving you more of a positive ROI, it's like WAR in baseball. Sure. To a degree. So if they're giving you more of a positive return, obviously you're going to be competing for the title towards the end of the year. You get a lot of guys that are giving you that negative return, you're probably outside looking in when it comes playoff time. So
sure.
Getting in, let's go to wide receiver 3. And obviously, this is another group of guys that are just woof. There's some gems in this tier, I think, because I've got some of these guys that are in this tier on ADP consensus on Fantasy Pros that are inside my top 24. But
so let's ask you for who's some of these guys that are inside your top 24 there.
Okay, so looking at my rankings right now, we've got starting off at 25, Chris Godwin. I have Chris Godwin ranked at wide receiver 18 currently.
Okay. It's a lot of Baker Mayfield love there. Okay.
Well, Kyle Trask had took all the first team reps on the 11 on 11s today in Bucks camp. So
wouldn't that be even more scary?
I don't know. He's a wild card. He's an absolute wild card. We watched him play at Florida, obviously, Tennessee fans here. So we're adept and we've seen a lot of Kyle Trask. He looked great at Florida, different offense.
At least the last year he
playing there. So yeah, that's something I think personally. I think him being the wild card there, it's a little bit. I'm intrigued to a degree if Kyle Trask was the quarterback, but I think this is more of a situation where I've got Godwin ranked at 18. It's a volume play. That the defense is not going to be very good. They're going to be playing from behind quite a bit, so they're going to have to be in throwing situations, positive game scripts for the passing offense. So I think that Godwin being the guy that's playing that intermediate area, going to get a lot of snaps, a lot of usage, a lot of target volume. I think the opportunity is why I've got him up a little bit higher. Also looking at this tier in wide receiver 3, but guys I have in the wide receiver 2, Drake London. Drake London right now showing at wide receiver 27 in ADP consensus. I've got him at wide receiver 21, right behind DJ Moore. Lot of good news coming out of camp there. London's looked good early on in camp. Desmond Ridder has looked somewhat decent in camp early on too. I obviously another wild card. Drake London, another guy that I've got inside my top 24 there. Those are the two guys that I have that are above the wide receiver 3 tier that we're looking at right now on fantasypros.com.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, those two guys are definitely somebody that I would rank a little bit higher than their current ADP on Fantasy Pros. Mike Williams is another one of those guys. Look, especially if you're looking in a league like you and I are drafting right now, a best ball league, there, Mike Williams is, for me, one of those ultimate boomer bust guys. I mean, he's going to come out, some weeks have 2 touchdowns are going to come out other weeks and not really do that much.
Yeah. One catch for 13. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So guys in this tier that I'm a big fan of this tier. I mean, I think, for me, this is where I'm going to find a lot of my, wide receiver 2 type guys, especially if I, go running back a little bit early, maybe if you grab that tight end a little bit early. But I think right at the very end, I think the guy that doesn't belong in this tier, to me anyway, who I don't particularly like and won't be touching in any leagues whatsoever, just with his injury history, is Kadarius Toney. Will not be touching him in any league.
No.
No matter how long it takes, I will not be touching him. But I think, the guys that I mentioned early, but to me, this is that steady Eddie kind of crew. There's a lot of guys in here that, could easily be, top, 20 options right here, depending on how things shake. I mean, Deontay Johnson's going to get a ton of receptions. Michael Pittman's got Anthony Richardson throwing the ball now. We've talked about Brandon Ayuk, and his ability there. Marquise Brown is the de facto number 1 now in Arizona with DeAndre Hopkins gone. Who's going to be throwing him the ball over there? But I think at the very least, if it's Colt McCoy, if it's, depending on how quick Kyler Murray comes back, he has a good chance to be able to make some waves in this offense. So, I like a lot of the guys in this tier. Again, we talked about tier-based drafting a little bit. To me, this is that tier to where I don't think there's that much differentiation. Granted, there are definitely guys that I like and I think could finish that top 15 versus guys that I think this is about right. But, is there a lot of separation in this group? No. Immediately after this group, it takes a tremendous dip in terms of my confidence on some
Grand Canyon. Yeah, no, Garrett flashed on the screen. Garrett W saying he still feels like Heineke will be the quarterback eventually in Atlanta. What do you say to that? I feel like Ritter's going to be the guy all year. I think they want to see what they've got out of him.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're at least going to give him the reins to start. I'm like Garrett. I kind of think Heineke is going to be given the opportunity at some point, either by injury or non-performance, by Ritter to come in.
Depends on where they are halfway through the year. That division is gettable.
It is gettable for them. I mean, the Falcons were really close to winning this division last year.
I was going to say, they're in the same boat as they were in last year. They gave Mariota the boot last year, even though that they, the offense was sputtering. They needed a spark. They were still within grasp of that division.
Sure.
Ritter come in. I mean, heck, they were down to the wire the last 2 weeks, still had a chance to do it. I think it's, again, roles reversed this year. If Heineke's in, I think it's because Ritter's sputtering and they're still within reach.
Sure. I mean, look at what Heineke did in Washington last year. I mean, Heineke came in and was winning games last year, for Washington. So he's coming in. I think he's a very capable backup. For fantasy, I don't really think there's going to be that big of a difference one way or another with those two guys, in that situation.
Yeah.
I think I like the upside of Ritter definitely more than Heineke. You're kind of, you know what you're going to get with Heineke.
Yeah.
There. I mean, he's gonna be that guy that's gonna come in, have a few good weeks in there, but he's not gonna be anybody, to me anyway, that's fantasy worthy. His impact is, what does he bring to Drake London? What does he bring to Kyle Pitts?
Yep.
How many holes can he open for Bijan? Because really, that's the question. I mean, I think Atlanta is definitely in a position to win that division. Although at the end of the day, I think the Carolina Panthers are going to be winning that division.
I'm leaning on the Saints on that one. I think Vegas is on the Saints right now too. That's kind of where I'm leaning.
That's why I like that.
So, back into the wide receiver threes, you touched on, obviously Marquise Brown is a big name for me in this tier. I think he has the biggest shot to kind of be a top 24 guy. Similar to Chris Godwin, volume based. That team is going to be awful, especially early on in the season in Arizona out there. They're going to be behind game script. It's going to be a pass to get back into it situation. And, Marquise Brown is definitely the guy that you really want to jump into and target in that situation, in that grouping here. Mike Evans is another guy going back into the Buccaneers offense. What are we looking at there with Mike Evans? Mike Evans is the guy that's 10, 11 straight years as a wide receiver that's gone over 1,000 yards. Can he do that again this year with Baker Mayfield, Kyle Trask at quarterback? That remains to be seen. And I think that question mark is why he's ranked at wide receiver 30 right now. I'm kind of right there along the lines with him. I've got him at wide receiver 32. So there's definitely a lot of question marks there when it comes to Mike Evans. So, but outside of that, in this grouping, like you mentioned, a lot of steady type of guys there. There's some production to be had based on the offenses that they're playing in. But as the case with the wide receiver twos as well, there's question marks. And that's what you're looking at. And now we get into what you mentioned too in the wide receiver 4 tier is the Grand Canyon, and where things start to really fall off as far as guys that you can count on. And in a lot of these guys in this next tier and following tiers, you get a lot of coin flip situations, what you're going to get week in, week out with a lot of these guys. You mentioned Kadarius Toney there to end wide receiver 3's tier. I think now with the injury, he's going to slip on past this tier. And I think he's going to fall into that kind of a wide receiver 5 tier once drafts are really kicked on and going.
Sure.
Because of the injury. So, but with this tier, wide receiver 4, so you're looking at guys that are ranked wide receiver 37 through wide receiver 48, 12-team leagues, of course. Guys, that give me a name or two that you're really confidence level feeling good on, and then confidence level not great on. You're booing and you're letting them by.
Yeah, I mean, there's only a few names in here that I'm going to be wooing. This is definitely a tier that I do not want to be part of. You got a lot of question marks. I mean, Michael Thomas, if healthy, I think is a good receiver to be had. But when's the last time he's been healthy? I can't even remember. So 2 names that I actually like out of this tier. Juju Smith-Schuster is the number 1 receiver in that New England passing offense. He came off of having a pretty decent year last year, and I think is prime for a guy that's going to be a number 1 in that receiving core here. And then I actually like Cortland Sutton better than I do Jerry Jeudy. I think the offense that you see with Sean Payton bringing into there, Cortland Sutton, the position he plays, is the receiver that has had the most long-term success compared to the role that Jerry Jeudy has in that offense. So those are two big names. And then you see a lot of rookies in here. Of those 4 rookies in this tier, the only one I am really confident in liking, it's kind of weird because I've talked already about, one of his teammates, but Quentin Johnson, I think, is one of those guys that, I think he could be the best of these rookie wide receivers that is in this tier here.
Yeah, I like Quentin Johnston. We're seeing a lot of good positive news coming out of camp with him so far. If you kind of read into a lot of that stuff, but obviously with the rookie wide receivers, you do want to see those guys getting a lot of work early on in camp. Same thing with Jackson Smith and Jigba. We're seeing that at a Seahawks camp. Every single day you're seeing camp footage out of him coming out of Seattle, making highlight catches, working his way, weaving through the defense and stuff like that too. Obviously, you're going to see the positive stuff. You're not going to see any of the negative stuff. But in this tier here, the guy that I'm the highest on is Jahan Dotson. I think Dotson is going to put a little bit more. It's going to be a closer gap between he and Terry McLaurin in that Washington offense this year. I think Dotson has a little bit more upside getting into the end zone. I've got him actually ranked fairly high. He's up to wide receiver 33 in my rankings right now. And not far back behind him are some other guys that, I've got guys, we'll get into the next tier, that are even in the wide receiver 3s tier that I've got currently ranked. But Jordan Addison, obviously, he's a guy that I'm a little bit higher on too out of these rookies, falling into that Adam Thielen role with the Minnesota Vikings. A lot of vacated targets there. I like what I see there out of Jordan Addison. Obviously, Dalvin Cook's gone. Second year under Kevin O'Connell. I think there's going to be more of an emphasis on the passing game this year. They're just going to use Alexander Mattison, Ty Chandler, Dwayne McBride as guys that are going to be able to kind of try to keep a little bit of that balance, but they're going to be more pass heavy in that offense. And like I said, volume-based targets galore. I think that's the situation you're looking at with Jordan Addison there. Michael Thomas, I've been burned. I'm not ready to get back on that one, that trek just yet. Let me see him on the field and playing in preseason games and looking healthy before I'm ready to really kind of feel great about him. He's another guy that I've got a little bit further down in my rankings. I've got him at 47 at wide receiver right now. Just not feeling it yet. But yeah, this tier here, there's a good mix of guys. Brandon Cooks, another guy with the Cowboys, coming in wide receiver 2 there. Although I don't feel like that passing offense is going to be as heavy volumed as it's been in the past. I think Cooks is the best wide receiver 2 that they've had there in years. And he's been a guy, when he's been healthy, he's been a top 20 wide receiver in fantasy any year. He's played 16, 17 games. So that's something else to keep in mind there, that a guy that you're going to get late that could be a positive ROI guy in that tier as well. So, but I think the biggest thing in this tier, probably the 2 guys that I'm really looking at that I'm letting pass by, like I mentioned, is Michael Thomas and obviously Odell Beckham. Not feeling Odell Beckham coming back from the injury and going to the Ravens offense. I like Zay Flowers more than I like Odell Beckham, especially from a value standpoint in drafts right now. But the wild card in this tier here, and as a guy that obviously I got burned on last year, Gabe Davis. I think we overvalued Gabe Davis last year. And now just looking at him this year, I think he's maybe a smidge undervalued, because more than he let on last year, that high ankle sprain really, really deterred his season. Now this year, fully healthy, they need that number 2 wide receiver option in that Buffalo offense to really take the pressure off Stephon Diggs. So I think Gabe Davis, the Gabe Davis we saw in the first month of the season before the injury, if we can get that Gabe Davis throughout the season fully healthy, Gabe Davis is obviously going to go way above that wide receiver 44 ranking that you're seeing on Fantasy Pros right now.
Sure, yeah. It's all about where he's come from. I think, one of the biggest things I love is that post-type superstar, right? He was going so high last year, and, at his ADP, I loved Gabe Davis 2 years ago. You talked about him before most people even knew about him. Before that playoff game where he busted out earlier in that year, saying that he was going to come out, and he did, but then that game sent him into overdrive for drafts this last year, and it I was fine getting him in drafts, but not that high. So I think it just goes to show you, there's hype around guys, and that's kind of what I'm feeling a little bit this year around Garrett Wilson. Just the hype is just getting to be too much. I'm not saying he's not a good receiver. The hype's just getting a little bit to be a little bit too much at his current ADP.
Right.
So at this point right now, Gabe Davis is right about that range to where, he's going to be a very high upside guy. Again, I would much rather have him as a 3 or 4 versus a number 2 like he was going last year.
Okay. Yeah, I'm definitely right there with you on that one. So now that we're into the latter stages here, so wide receiver 5 and on, we'll kind of group all these guys together and really kind of point some names here, that guys that are past that first 4-tier group, guys that you're really looking to get onto your roster late in drafts, sleeper potential type guys that are still right now undervalued, but are probably likely going to rise in ADP the closer we get towards the end of August and as the drafts really get going.
Well, I'll go ahead and mention him because you threw it to me first, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it for you there. But Nico Collins is a guy that for me, he's the number 1 receiver in that offense. You got a much better quarterback he had the year before with CJ Stroud leading that offense. So I think he has got a really good opportunity to be able to make a big move up. I've had him the last couple of years. I've been burned by him, but man, when this guy has been healthy, he has done well. But DJ Shark, I think, is going to be the number 1 wide receiver in that Carolina passing offense. Nonetheless, I think he's definitely going to have some big weeks. And then, probably my highest rated rookie, honestly, out of any of this group, is Rashee Rice in Kansas City. I am not a fan of the smaller wide receivers. You got, Sky Moore that's there. A lot of people are hyping him up just like they were hyping Kadarius Toney up. I had Sky Moore last year as my number 4 receiver. He was not there. He was not present at all in the passing offense. I don't see that big move. I mean, I would almost, beg to differ that a guy like Justin Ross, with how good he's been looking in camp so far, may make that jump even a little bit there. But one of those bigger guys I feel like is going to be, kind of coming into that wide receiver, or I should say receiver 2 role behind Travis Kelce in that Kansas City offense. So those are 3 guys that I'm looking at amongst there to me. And then there's one other spot. I can't tell who I like just yet so far. For the Giants, it's either going to be Isaiah Hodgins or Paris Campbell. I think one of those guys is gonna really take a step up. I'm eager to see some preseason games to see, but based on where I'm seeing things so far and just some of the hype, I feel like Paris Campbell may be that guy.
Yeah, that was going to be kind of a two of the teams that I was really going to try to group together. Is, the Giants receiving situation. We have to see how that's going to shake out. You mentioned Hodgins, Paris Campbell, Darius Slayton. I mean, but obviously the big target there and the guy that's getting all the camp hype right now is my guy Darren Waller. Going to lead that team in receptions and targets likely this year. Is who's going to shake out to be that number 2 option outside of Saquon Barkley catching passes out of the backfield. That remains to be seen. I was going to ask you your take on the KC receiving trio outside of Kadarius Toney right now. You kind of gave me that. Is because it depends on the day, really. When you're looking at camp highlights or news coming out of the camp, is one day it's Justin Ross is looking good and having a great day at camp. One day it's Sky Moore's having a great day at camp. Then the next day you see great highlights with Rashee Rice, and he's having a great day at camp. Rashee Rice is a guy that I was high on coming out of the NFL draft, and perfect landing spot too. And I felt that there was obviously a great buying opportunity with Rashee Rice late in drafts, but now you're starting to get a little bit of hype. That ADP is going to start climbing a little bit. He is on a number of my underdog rosters right now, so he's a guy that I've really liked hitting the select button on later in drafts. Elijah Moore is the guy that's right here. Boom, wide receiver 54. I don't know why he's there. He should not be there. And
Now, why do you think that? Because, like, for me, I think this is about right for him. I mean, he was really good that first year. I think, you know, there is, to me, in this offense, and this is me talking, just my outside opinion, and I like Elijah Moore, but you got David Njoku you're competing with catches with, Donovan Peoples-Jones. You and I both know exactly who Cedric Tillman is, and you know he's a good receiver.
Yeah.
So it's not that I don't like Elijah Moore. I just think there's going to be a lot of balls going around. I think Amari Cooper's going to get a lot there. I just think Elijah Moore is not going to be separating himself enough as a number 2 receiver in that offense to warrant much of a higher selection than where he's going right here. So
I absolutely do. And the thing is you mentioned, of course, David Njoku. David Njoku's production, especially middle to late in season last year in 2022, had a lot to do with the fact that there wasn't really a lot of options there in that passing attack with the Cleveland Browns. And obviously you had Deshaun Watson not coming in until week 12 last year. And when he came in, there was a lot of rust. The offense just looked discombobulated and out of sync. Now they've got a full off season that they're working together, and I'm always going to bet on talent. And Elijah Moore has been the guy that's been talented, but has been stuck with dog crap for the last 2 years with the New York Jets. Let me give you that. The New York Jets. Zach Wilson's been his quarterback. I mean, Mike White's been his quarterback. But he was in the doghouse for much of last year because he wanted opportunities and the team wouldn't give him opportunities. So obviously a malcontent. They ship him out. Now he's in Cleveland and he's thriving. If you reports coming out from the team, you know, aside if you watch camp highlight videos and stuff like that, but reports coming out of the team is that he has just been the guy Deshaun Watson's looking at. Boom, boom, boom. Snap, Elijah Moore. Snap, Elijah Moore. So I think that's going to be a situation where ADP at 54 currently, there's no way that he's going to stay at 54. I've got him at wide receiver 35. That's how much I'm invested in him right now. Wow. I think he's definitely a buying opportunity as things currently are constituted. Positive ROI for Elijah Moore that you can get in drafts right now.
We're gonna go ahead and make a bet. I'm gonna say if you get Elijah Moore at 35, you're gonna have negative ROI.
I'm not going to have to get him at wide receiver 35. That's the best thing about that is because where he's going to go in drafts, I'm going to be able to get him at wide receiver 45, 6, 7, 8. And I'm getting a guy that I think is going to outperform that by 10. So that's what I'm looking at with Elijah Moore. He outperforms where he's going easily right now. You nailed it on the head with Nico Collins. I'm in on Nico Collins again, year after year. It seems like that's the situation. And then our guy from last year, we talked about him a lot in the preseason and throughout the season, you know, on the podcast last year, Romeo Doubs. Looks like he's having a tremendous camp with Green Bay right now. Seems to be a lot of nice rapport with Jordan Love. Obviously, they spent a lot of time together last offseason, you know, in the backup squad, the second team offense. So they had a little bit of connection last year, and it seems to be bleeding over into this year. So that's something to keep an eye on early on in camp and in preseason games is how Dobbs looks compared to Christian Watson and how things lead out there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think those two guys, I mean, you know, to me, if you got two receivers on a team like that, just like we mentioned, you know, a little while ago, I'd much rather have the guy that's a little bit lesser on his ADP because you're not going to have to invest as much in. So, I mean,
right.
God, there's so many times Romeo Doubs last year had wide open touchdowns that Aaron Rodgers overthrew him, or so many times that he was there. And granted, you know, we've got a new quarterback that we've got coming in with Jordan Love here, where he could be even worse, but
wild card situation. I mean,
yeah, sure.
We keep saying
he's definitely a guy that I would love to have, you know, there as well. So
yeah. Then two other names that are way beyond the pale when it comes to guys that are ranked currently, especially with ADP consensus. But I will continue to pound the table for them and guys that I want to get in the last rounds of my drafts at the wide receiver position. And I suggest that you do the same while you can get them cheap. Puka Nacua.
Are you serious? Okay.
Puka
There's
Nacua.
no way I'm drafting a guy named Puka, by the
Puka
way.
Nacua he's been a guy that's obviously he's making a stand early on in Rams camp. From everything that I read so far, it looks like he's kind of settling in to pushing Van Jefferson to be that number 2 option behind Cooper Kupp in that offense, which again, similar to the Buccaneers and what we talked about earlier, positive game script for the passing offense. The Rams are going to be awful this year. We know that. That team is going to be playing from behind, and if Matthew Stafford is healthy, he's going to produce numbers. And it's not all going to go to Cooper Kupp. A lot of it's going to go to Cooper Kupp, but not all of it.
It's going to go to Cooper Kupp.
And I think that secondary passing volume, obviously Tyler Higbee's there. He was a big part of that offense too. But I think Puka Nacua is a guy that you can get late in drafts and have him on the end of your bench that's going to be able to come in and be a spot starter midway through the year and on out through the remainder of the year as he really kind of takes hold in that offense. And then the next guy, another rookie, Michael Wilson with the Cardinals. I've been all over Michael Wilson all off season, especially with that landing spot. Great landing spot. Learns from Marquise Brown. Another situation similar to the Rams and the Bucks. Team is going to be playing from behind quite often. We mentioned it with Marquise Brown earlier. Michael Wilson has looked outstanding in camp so far. Great news coming out of camp with him already. It seems like the team is destined to put him at wide receiver 2 right out of the gate, even ahead of Greg Dortch, even ahead of Rondell Moore. We obviously, Rondell Moore, Greg Dortch are more fit to be in the slot, whereas Michael Wilson's a guy that's going to be that X receiver on the outside, opposite of Marquise Brown. And if he's starting from game 1, you're getting a guy that's going to really be able to produce numbers for you that you're getting for free in drafts right now.
Sure. And a guy that's down there a little bit as well, that, I know I mentioned, a little bit earlier, DJ Shark. But a guy that I am taking a little bit late in drafts as well, who I think could make a big push up, Terrace Marshall, is definitely one of those names that I'm looking at. Again, much like the Giants receiving situation, I think one of those two guys is going to do well. You've got an aging Adam Thielen over there as well, but I think in a much improved offense, Terrace Marshall could be making a big move up the boards there as well. As you're going through those latter rounds of the drafts.
So last thing before we kind of call it a pod for the night and sign things off, let me get one name or two, depending on what you want to do, that you're fading at the wide receiver position this year, and you will not be drafting.
Anywhere on the board?
Anywhere on the board.
Well, we talked about Kadarius Toney. I will not be touching Kadarius Toney, period. I won't be touching Sky Moore, period. I'm just not at those current rates of where these guys are going. That's just way too rich for my blood. Again, Garrett Wilson, I think, is another one of those guys. Let me find a name. Okay, here we go. I know you mentioned him a little bit earlier and how good he was looking, but just the ADP and where he's going is somewhere that I'm not going to be biting on Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think he's the number one rookie rated wide receiver right now in terms of ADP. To me, there's just not enough balls to go around in that offense. I think Geno Smith is going to have a little bit of a reduction there as well. I'm not saying I don't want Jackson Smith and Jigba in terms of a dynasty receiver, but at least in terms of this year one, he is just outside of a wide receiver 3. Way too rich for my blood. I will be fading him all day long at that value.
Yeah, it's good. He's a good best ball target currently, but a lot of people are really overlooking what Tyler Lockett means to the Seahawks passing offense to grab Jackson Smith and Jigba because he is the shiny new toy, and we're discounting a guy that is really he's out targeted DK Metcalf last year and Tyler Lockett. So that's a good pull there. I kind of agree with you. Redraft, I'm not in on him currently. I think he's going too high as opposed to where he needs to be going for a redraft league. Dynasty, I'm there with him. I'm grabbing him. I actually drafted him in our Rotoballer Dynasty League. He was my first round pick in that league, but that's a rookie draft. So, But my guy, and I'm going to have a contribution piece that's going to be coming out on Fantasy Pros here in the next couple of days. The guy that I'm not going to be touching and not drafting this year, especially at current ADP, is T. Higgins. T. Higgins coming off the board as a wide receiver 12 or 13, as a wide receiver 2. And if you do a deep dive into his career numbers, 58% of the time he has brought back a weekly finish at wide receiver 3 or worse. And he has yet to finish above wide receiver. I think he finished 2 of the last 3 years since he's gotten the leagues wide receiver 26. So a lot of people are really, really excited, obviously, about the Bengals offense. But outside of Jamar Chase, I don't think that there's going to be that much all volume that's going to return a guy that's going to be a fringe wide receiver 1. And that's where he's getting drafted right now. And I can't see myself doing it. I'm going to take Chris Olave every time over a T. Higgins. I'm going to take Deebo Samuel, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper over a T. Higgins every single time when presented with that opportunity. And I would probably suggest for you all to do the same in your drafts as well. So that's my 2 cents there, and that's what I'm looking at as the biggest avoid for me in drafts this year. But so wrapping things up, and I'm gonna bring this puppy back into the view here as I end the show. We're getting ready to get on that jet plane heading up to New York City. Flying up there on Friday.
Here we go. Here it comes back out.
Gonna get to go see all the guys, hang out with everybody in the flex drafts.
Packing that thing, or you carrying it with you on the plane?
I think I'm gonna pack it with. I'm gonna take it with us.
Okay.
I'm gonna take it with us. So we're gonna have this on display while we're drafting this year. I gotta let everybody know where the champ's at. So
the champ is here.
The champ is here, except it's not a spinner belt. I can't, like John Cena has a spinner belt. So that's what we've got coming up this weekend. I'm going up there for the Sirius XM Flex Leagues draft. I'm doing the Snake draft. I believe starts at 11 a.m. On Sirius XM. You'll be able to follow on Twitter as well. Obviously, through my Twitter account, I'll try to kind of keep everybody as up to date with how the draft's going, things like that. So be sure to follow us there at 11 a.m. Saturday morning with the Flex Leagues draft, followed by the Superflex draft, I believe that's going to start at about 1 o'clock Eastern time. So those 2 drafts will be going on live from New York City this weekend, Sirius XM, Fantasy Sports Radio. Be sure to tune in to watch me defend this championship title belt for 2023 in the Flex League Snake draft. But outside of that, we've knocked out the wide receivers. Coming back next week, we'll try to get another pod in. We'll probably talk a little bit of some tight ends next week. Ooh. Get everybody ready for the tight end position, which obviously year after year we talk about how this might be the deepest year for tight ends. There's a lot of options.
It's deep.
And what happens? And what happens every single year? Yeah. We get outside of the top 5, top 6, you're looking at guys that are just roster churned week in and week out. You're dropping guys, picking up guys, matchup plays here and there. So don't let the talk fool you. Yeah, there's some guys that could be sleepers out there, but it's not a deep position. And we're going to jump in here. And we're going to try to talk you through it. We'll try to traverse through the landmines of the tight end position like we did tonight with the wide receivers for you there. So, Nick, anything coming up outside of 2 weeks away? We're going to be in Bowling Green up there for the SBFFC. So everybody, if you've not been aware of the SBFFC, we talk about it on this podcast as well. So go check that out, sbffc.com.
22 leagues of 12 drafting up there.
Yes.
There's a whole weekend's worth, but that's the main event. Friday night, a couple of different drafts. Saturday night, main event. I take part in an auction league Saturday morning, so just a whole weekend full of drafting. Right. If you want to get into some higher stakes leagues, compete against the best live and in person, no better spot than the SBFFC in Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Definitely. Biggest event outside of Vegas this side of the Mississippi River is what we like to we talk it up. But outside of that, that's 2 weeks away. We'll definitely talk about that more leading into it. But anything else coming down the pike for Nick Hefley there?
Man, just busy the next couple of weeks leading into that. So just finalizing fantasy rankings, getting those last little mock drafts in and set up and ready to go for draft season here. So.
All right there, and tell them where to find you on Twitter, and we'll wrap this show up for the evening.
Yeah, you can find me right down here, the real FF Goat.
And of course,
I'm not on Thread, so actually, it's on X, I guess, right?
Yeah, no, we're on X now. Yeah, that's true. So, that's the real FF Goat on Twitter. Obviously, I am at Roto Superstar Brandon Murchison. Find all my work over at rotoballer.com. Promo code Woo for a special discount at checkout. This is Woo_fantasy. Follow us there. Go to the YouTube page. Click the little button. Give us a like. Follow us. Subscribe. Everything there. Definitely would appreciate that. But until next time, you guys, we will see you on another episode of Woo Fantasy. See ya.